Have you ever been in a room full of noise, yet the only thing you can hear is the roaring of your own blood in your ears? That's what love felt like for me. A constant, low-level hum of anxiety beneath the surface of a life that, from the outside, looked like a dream come true. A life I had chosen, a man I had chosen, a choice that led me 8,000 miles from home, and eventually to the end of my rope. It all started, as most tragedies do, with a beautiful beginning. I met him, let's call him Leo, when I was just 19, a whirlwind of youthful optimism and a craving for adventure. I had moved to his country, a vibrant, chaotic place so different from my own quiet corner of the world. I threw myself into his culture, his world, and most of all, into his language. Within a year, I was fluent enough to navigate daily life, to joke with his friends, to whisper, "I love you," in the language he was born with. I was proud of it. It felt like I had built a bridge between my world and his, a bridge made of verbs and vowels. But I would soon learn that a bridge can be used by two people to meet in the middle, or it can be used by one person to trap the other on the wrong side of the canyon. Our relationship, now in its fifth year, was less of a stable bridge and more of a rope walk over that canyon. It was shaky, swaying with the unpredictable winds of his moods. He came with a past, a suitcase full of trauma he never fully unpacked but always carried with him. I understood that. I tried to be the safe harbor, the calm in his storm. But in my effort to calm his seas, I was slowly, imperceptibly, drowning in them myself. I wasn't perfect either. When I felt cornered, when my back was against the wall, a defensive, provocative side of me would claw its way out, a side that was born from years of feeling misunderstood, of fighting to be heard over a silence that was louder than any argument. The language, my hard-won skill, became the battlefield. In moments of peace, it was our love song, but in conflict, it became his weapon. It would happen during the most mundane of disagreements. I might use the wrong word or pause for a fraction of a second too long to find the right turn of phrase. His eyes would narrow, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Don't play dumb with me," he'd snap, his voice laced with an accusation that cut deeper than any insult. He wasn't just annoyed. He was accusing me of manipulation, of faking incompetence to win a fight. Each time he said it, he was taking my bridge, my beautiful, handcrafted bridge, and setting it on fire, leaving me stranded and alone. The real poison, however, was in his philosophy of anger. He laid it out for me once, with the cold logic of a tyrant explaining the rules of his kingdom. "It's simple," he said, his face a mask of detached reason. "If you don't want me to get angry, then don't do things that make me angry." An impossible request, a labyrinth with no exit, because I never knew what the trigger would be. One day it could be leaving a coffee cup on the counter. The next it could be the way I breathed. I was living in a minefield, and he was the one who kept moving the mines. I was constantly on edge, my nervous system a frayed wire, perpetually waiting for the explosion. And when the explosion came, it wasn't loud. It was silent. A silence so absolute, so heavy, it could suffocate you. He wouldn't yell, he wouldn't scream. He would simply cease to acknowledge my existence. I would become a ghost in our own home, a phantom he could see right through. He would walk past me in the hallway, his shoulder never brushing mine. He would make food for one, watch TV alone, go to bed turning his back to my side, leaving an icy expanse between us. The first few years, this tactic shattered me. I would plead, cry, beg for him to just tell me what I did wrong. My desperation was a fuel to his fire, my tears the water that made his resolve grow stronger. I didn't know it then, but my pleading was giving him exactly what he wanted: control. This last time, it started over something so trivial I can barely remember it. I think it was about weekend plans. I had suggested we visit a museum, and he had wanted to stay home. A normal conversation for a normal couple. But the air grew thick. I must have said something, used a tone, made a face. I'll never know for sure. I saw the switch flip behind his eyes. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, flat emptiness. He stood up from the dinner table, leaving his half-eaten meal behind, and walked into the living room. He picked up the remote control, and the low murmur of the television filled a space that was a moment ago filled with our conversation. He didn't say a word. I sat there, my own food turning to ash in my mouth. I asked him what was wrong. My voice sounded small, pathetic in the sudden cavern of our apartment. He didn't flinch. His eyes remained fixed on the screen. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. I had ceased to exist. The silence had begun. How long would it be this time? Half a day? A full day? 3? A week? I had no way of knowing. All I knew was that I was alone again, trapped in our beautiful apartment that suddenly felt like a tomb. And as I sat there, listening to the hollow sound of a sitcom laugh track, a chilling thought echoed in the quiet of my mind. This wasn't just a shaky relationship anymore. This was a cage, and I was beginning to forget where the door was. Day one of the silence was always the loudest. The absence of his voice created a vacuum that every other sound rushed to fill, each one amplified, each one a testament to my solitude. The ticking of the clock on the wall became a metronome, counting the seconds of my isolation. The hum of the refrigerator felt like a low growl, a constant reminder of the coldness that had enveloped our home. I woke up that first morning with a familiar knot of dread in my stomach. I had slept fitfully, half expecting to roll over and find him looking at me, the spell broken. But his side of the bed was empty. I walked into the kitchen and saw him standing by the counter, dressed for work, pouring a coffee. My heart gave a pathetic little flutter of hope. Maybe the night had softened him. Maybe the morning had brought clarity. "Good morning," I said, my voice trying to sound casual, light, as if nothing was wrong. He didn't turn. He didn't even pause. He simply finished pouring his coffee, put the pot back, and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps echoing down the hall. He passed me as if I were a piece of furniture, an inanimate object unworthy of a glance. The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. I learned long ago that trying to force a conversation was like throwing myself against a brick wall. In the early years, I would have followed him. I would have stood in the doorway, my voice cracking, asking, "Can we please talk about this? What did I do? Just tell me what I did." And my pleading would only make the wall higher, the silence more profound. He saw my desperation not as a sign of love or a desire to connect, but as a weakness to be exploited. He knew that the longer he held out, the more I would break, the more I would eventually apologize for a crime I didn't even know I had committed. It was a brutal, effective form of training. He was conditioning me to accept the blame. Always. So now I knew better. I had learned to leave him be. I made my own coffee, the bitter taste a perfect match for my mood. I moved around our shared space like a dancer in a complicated, unspoken choreography. We were two celestial bodies trapped in the same orbit, close enough to feel each other's gravitational pull but destined never to touch. I would move to the living room when he was in the bedroom. I would use the bathroom after he had left for work. Our apartment, once a sanctuary of our shared life, had become a territory to be navigated, with invisible lines I couldn't cross and rules written in a language of pure, unadulterated contempt. The worst part was the gaslighting that came with it. I'd spend hours, days, replaying our last conversation in my head, dissecting every word, every nuance. Was it my tone? Did I sound dismissive when I suggested the museum? Maybe I should have just agreed to stay home. He works hard. He's probably just tired. It's my fault. I pushed him. His silence was a canvas, and I would paint my own guilt all over it. He had created a system where he didn't have to accuse me of anything. I would do all the work for him. I would become my own prosecutor, judge, and jury, and I always found myself guilty. That evening, he came home from work, and the ritual continued. He took off his shoes, hung his coat, and walked straight to the living room, not a single glance in my direction. I was cooking dinner, the familiar smells of garlic and herbs filling the kitchen. It was an act of defiance, in a way, an insistence that I still existed, that I had needs, that my life would not grind to a halt just because he had decided to excommunicate me. In the past, I would have cooked his favorite meal as a peace offering. Now, I cooked for myself. But as I set a single plate at the table, the loneliness was a physical ache in my chest. I ate my dinner to the sound of his video game, the artificial explosions and gunfire a bizarre soundtrack to my quiet misery. Later that night, I lay in bed, the space between us feeling like a vast frozen lake. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body just inches away, yet it couldn't reach me. It was in these moments, in the dark, that the true terror of my situation would begin to creep in. He had started talking about the future more and more lately, specifically about children. "I can't wait to have a family with you," he'd say during our good times, his voice soft, his eyes full of a future I so desperately wanted to believe in. We'd talk about names, about what kind of parents we'd be. But as I lay there in the oppressive silence, a horrifying image flashed in my mind. Me, 9 months pregnant, swollen and vulnerable, and him walking past me with that same cold indifference because I had said the wrong thing. Me with a crying newborn in my arms, exhausted and terrified, begging for his help, while he sat on the sofa, headphones on, pretending I wasn't there. That thought sent a jolt of ice-cold fear through my veins. A child deserves a safe environment. A child deserves a home filled with warmth and communication, not this psychological warfare. And what about me? My family was 14 hours away. I had no real support system here. His friends were my friends. His life was my life. If something happened, if I was alone with a baby and he decided to shut down for a week, who would I call? Who would be there for me? I realized with a sickening clarity that this wasn't just about my unhappiness anymore. This was about a future I was actively building, a future that could potentially trap not just me, but an innocent child in the same toxic cycle. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was the absence of safety. It was the absence of support. It was the absence of a partner. I was looking at a man I had loved for 5 years, a man I had crossed an ocean for, and for the first time I wasn't just seeing a troubled partner, I was seeing a danger to the life I hadn't even created yet. And that realization changed everything. He thought his silence was his greatest weapon. He had no idea it was about to become my greatest motivator.
The silence stretched into its 3rd day, and a strange shift began to occur within me. The initial sting of rejection and the frantic internal search for blame started to fade, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was like being submerged in murky water for years, and suddenly my head broke the surface. I could breathe, and I could see the shoreline. The silence was no longer just a punishment he inflicted upon me. It was becoming a space for me to think, an unintended gift of solitude where my own voice, long suppressed, could finally begin to whisper. I started to observe him not as a participant in a drama, but as a scientist studying a subject. I watched his routines, his unwavering commitment to my non-existence. He'd wake up, make his coffee, go to the gym, come home, shower, work, eat, play his games, and go to bed, all with a meticulous precision that was chilling. He was performing normalcy in a profoundly abnormal situation. He was proving to himself and to me that his life could function perfectly fine without me in it. It was a power play, a demonstration of his independence to highlight my supposed dependence. Little did he know, with every passing hour, I was discovering my own. My mind started to travel back in time, not to find my own faults, but to collect evidence. I remembered a dinner party with his friends about a year ago. I was telling a story in his language, feeling confident and included. But I stumbled on a colloquialism, a tricky local phrase. I paused, corrected myself, and laughed it off. But Leo didn't laugh. He sighed, a loud, theatrical sound, and said to the table, "You'll have to forgive her. She tries hard, but her grasp on the language is a little dramatic. He said it with a smile, as if it were a joke, and his friends chuckled politely. But I saw the smirk on his face. It wasn't a joke. It was a public belittling, disguised as a term of endearment. He was reminding me and everyone else that I was an outsider, that I was, and always would be, slightly less than. Another memory surfaced, a time we had a serious argument about finances. I was struggling to articulate a complex point about our budget, the specific financial terms escaping me under the pressure of his growing anger. He let me stumble for a full minute before cutting me off. Just stop. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're just saying words. Are you playing dumb to get out of this conversation? There it was, again, that phrase, playing dumb. He wasn't just disagreeing with me. He was invalidating my intelligence, using my linguistic vulnerability as proof of my supposed incompetence or manipulation. He had weaponized my effort against me, turning my desire to communicate into a character flaw. These memories, once isolated incidents I had brushed off or blamed myself for, now began to connect, forming a clear, undeniable pattern. This wasn't about his past trauma. This wasn't about me being provocative. It was about control. It was about him maintaining the upper hand in every situation. If he was more fluent, he was smarter. If he was more angry, he was more justified. If he was silent, he was in control. My entire existence in his world was conditional, based on my ability to perfectly navigate his moods and never, ever challenge his authority. On the fourth day of silence, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into my old email account, the one I used before I moved here. I scrolled through messages from college friends, from my family. I saw a picture of a younger me, 19 years old, grinning from ear to ear at my going-away party. She looked fearless, excited, full of a light I barely recognize anymore. What would that girl think of me now? Tiptoeing around my own home, afraid to make a sound. What would she say about a man who treats her like she's invisible because she suggested going to a museum? That girl wouldn't have stood for it for a single day. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. Where did she go? That night, as Leo sat in the living room, completely absorbed in a movie, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The house was dark, save for the flickering light of his screen and the soft glow of mine. My fingers trembled as I opened a web browser. I typed in the name of my hometown airport, then an arrow, then the name of the city I now called home, and then I clicked search. The screen filled with flight options, dates, times, prices. For a moment, it felt illicit, like I was looking at something forbidden. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wasn't buying anything. I wasn't even making a plan. I was just looking. I was looking at a digital escape route, a list of possibilities that could transport me 8,000 miles away from this suffocating silence. I quickly closed the laptop when I heard his chair creak, my body reacting with the learned instinct of someone hiding a secret. He walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, his back to me. He still didn't look at me, but for the first time, I didn't feel a pang of hurt. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a quiet, thrilling power. He had no idea what I was doing just a few feet behind him. He was so consumed by his own manufactured drama, so confident in the effectiveness of his punishment, that he couldn't see the shift happening right under his nose. He thought he was erasing me, but he was only giving me the space I needed to redraw myself. As I sat there in the dark, my escape plan was no longer a vague fantasy. It was a seed that had just been planted, and in the fertile ground of his silence, it was beginning to grow.
The silence finally broke on the evening of the fifth day. It happened without ceremony, without apology. I was reading a book on the sofa when he walked in, sat down in his usual chair, and said, "What do you want for dinner?" Just like that. His voice, after nearly a week of absence, sounded alien, jarring. He didn't look at me. His eyes were on his phone, casually scrolling as if he had just asked me the most normal question in the world. 5 days of psychological warfare,
of treating me like a ghost, and he re-entered our shared reality with a question about food. In the past, this moment would have brought a tidal wave of relief. The punishment was over. I was being allowed back into his world. I would have eagerly answered, "Whatever you want," just to keep the peace, just to feel the warmth of his acknowledgement again. But this time, something was different. The cold clarity I had found in the silence had solidified into a shield. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not love, not even anger anymore. Just a profound and unshakable sense of finality. He wasn't just ending the silence. He was trying to erase it, to pretend the last 5 days never happened. He expected me to play along, to sweep the emotional debris under the rug and reset the clock until the next time. "I'm not hungry," I replied, my voice even, calm. I didn't look up from my book. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt monumental. I didn't cater to his question. I didn't jump at the chance for normalcy. I simply stated my truth. He felt his eyes on me for a moment, a flicker of surprise, maybe even annoyance. My response didn't fit the script. I was supposed to be grateful. He huffed quietly and left the room, the sound of cupboards opening and closing in the kitchen, signaling that he would, once again, be making dinner for one. But this time, it wasn't a punishment. It was a consequence, and I felt a quiet, steely resolve settle deep within me. This was the last time. From that moment on, I became a double agent in my own life. On the surface, I was the compliant girlfriend, slowly re-emerging from the disagreement. I would answer his questions, engage in small talk, and maintain the fragile illusion of our life together. But underneath, a meticulous plan was taking shape. His ignorance was my camouflage, his arrogance my greatest asset. He was so certain of his control over me that he never thought to look for the signs of a rebellion. My first step was securing my independence. I started going on long walks every afternoon. On these walks, I went to a bank and opened a new account in my name only, one he knew nothing about. I began siphoning off small amounts of my own savings, funds I had carefully kept separate since I first moved here. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a ticket fund, an emergency fund. It was freedom, quantified in dollars and cents. I spent hours in quiet library corners, researching my rights as a foreign resident, the process for breaking a lease, the logistics of shipping my most precious belongings home. Every piece of information I gathered was another brick in my runway. The hardest part was the emotional detachment. I had to learn to live alongside him, to sleep in the same bed, to share the same space, all while knowing I was leaving him. There were moments of weakness, of course, times when he would be charming, the man I first fell in love with. He'd bring me a cup of tea without me asking, or make a joke that would catch me off guard and make me laugh. In those moments, a treacherous little voice would whisper in my head, "See, it's not all bad. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe this time it will be different." But then I would remember the feeling of being invisible, the cold dread of the silence treatment, the terrifying image of being pregnant and alone. And I would force myself to remember this was part of the cycle. The affection was the bait that kept me in the trap. I started packing in secret, a little bit each day while he was at work. I bought a new suitcase and hid it in the back of the closet. I'd fold a few favorite sweaters, wrap a treasured photograph, tuck away a book that meant the world to me. My life, being condensed into a 23-kilogram limit. It was a painful, clarifying process. What do you take with you when you're escaping? Only what's essential. Only what's truly yours. Everything else, all the shared objects and memories that made up our home, began to look foreign to me. They were props on a stage, and my role in the play was coming to an end. The final piece of the puzzle was my family. I called my mother one afternoon, my heart hammering against my ribs. I kept my voice light, pretending I was just calling to chat, but she knew me too well. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, her voice instantly laced with concern. And for the first time, I told her. Not everything, not the whole ugly truth, but enough. I told her I was unhappy, that things with Leo were not good, that I was thinking of coming home for a long visit. I didn't say I was leaving for good. I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud yet, as if that would make it too real. But she understood. The relief in her voice was palpable. She said, "Your room is always here for you." And those words were the final permission I needed. I had a place to land. I booked the flight on a Tuesday morning, while he was in the shower. One way, for the following Monday. It gave me 6 days. 6 days to act normal. 6 days to play the part of the woman he thought he had broken. As I clicked confirm purchase, a wave of sheer terror and exhilarating freedom washed over me. The ticket confirmation appeared in my inbox, a digital promise of a new beginning. He came out of the bathroom, steam billowing around him, and smiled at me. "Morning," he said, casually. "Morning," I replied, my own smile feeling like a mask. He thought it was just another Tuesday. He had no idea it was the beginning of the end. He had made one fatal mistake. He thought his silence was about punishing me. He never realized it was about teaching me how to live without him.
The last 6 days were the longest and shortest of my life. I moved through our apartment like a ghost from a future he couldn't see, every action imbued with a secret significance. Making coffee was no longer a morning ritual. It was the last time I would use this coffee pot. Folding the laundry was the last time I would touch his clothes. Looking out our living room window at the city lights was my silent goodbye to a life I had once wanted so desperately. I was an actor in the final scenes of a movie, and only I knew how it was going to end. My composure was a fragile thing, a thin sheet of ice over a deep, churning ocean of fear and resolve. Leo, oblivious, was in a good phase. The storm had passed and the period of sunshine had begun. He was affectionate, attentive, talking about future plans. He suggested we book a vacation for the summer, showing me pictures of sun-drenched beaches on his phone. I nodded and smiled, my heart a lead weight in my chest. "It looks beautiful," I said, the words tasting like lies. He was planning a future for a we that would cease to exist in less than a week. The dramatic irony was so thick I could barely breathe. On Sunday, the day before my flight, I finished my secret packing. My suitcase was hidden, full and heavy with the essentials of my life. My important documents, my new bank card, and my passport were in my purse, ready to go. I had arranged for a car to pick me up early the next morning while he was at the gym. My plan was to be gone before he even knew I was leaving. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want a tearful, screaming fight where he could twist my words, play the victim, or wear me down with promises to change. I had heard those promises before. They were just another tool in his arsenal of control. This time, my departure would be as quiet and absolute as his silence had been. I wrote him a letter. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had endured so many silent meals, and I poured everything out onto the page. But as I wrote, I realized it wasn't for him. It was for me. It was a declaration of my own truth. I didn't accuse. I didn't name call. I simply described my experience. "Leo," I wrote, "I am writing this because I will be gone by the time you read it. For 5 years I have tried to navigate the landscape of your moods, and I can no longer do it. When you use silence as a weapon, you don't just punish me, you erase me. You create a home where I feel unsafe, unheard, and completely alone. You have accused me of playing dumb when I struggle with your language, but the truth is, I have been playing a part for a very long time, the part of a woman who is okay with being treated this way. And I am not okay. I cannot build a future, and I certainly cannot bring a child into a home that is filled with such profound and painful silence. This is not about one fight. It's about all of them. It's about me choosing to hear my own voice over the sound of your silence. I wish you peace, but my own peace is no longer here with you. Goodbye." I folded the letter and left it on his pillow, right where his head would be.
That night, lying in bed next to him for the last time was surreal. He fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind. Was I making a huge mistake? Was I throwing away 5 years of my life? The fear was immense. But then I thought about the alternative, a lifetime of walking on eggshells, a lifetime of being erased, a lifetime of that crushing, deafening silence, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was making the only choice I could. I was choosing myself. The next morning, my alarm went off before dawn. I slipped out of bed, dressed quickly, and took one last look at his sleeping form. For a fleeting second, he looked peaceful, vulnerable, like the man I fell in love with. A wave of sadness washed over me, a mourning for the love I had hoped we would have. But it was just a moment. I grabbed my suitcase, my purse, and walked out the door, closing it softly behind me. I didn't look back. The car was waiting outside, just as planned. As we drove through the dark, empty streets towards the airport, the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It felt like the world was waking up with me. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for years began to lift with every mile we drove. When I finally sat down at my gate and looked at my one-way ticket, I didn't feel sad or scared. I felt a profound sense of peace. The silence in the airport terminal was just silence. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a punishment. It was just an absence of noise. And in that quiet, for the first time in a long time, I could finally hear myself think. I chose to get on that plane. I chose to fly 8,000 miles back to the girl I used to be, hoping I could find her again. And that choice, born from years of being silenced, was the loudest, most powerful statement I have ever made. It makes me wonder, how many of us are living in a quiet desperation we have mistaken for peace? And what would you do if you finally found yourself at the end of your rope?